This is NDTV. And you're watching NDTV Prime.
India is a young country that is hungry for the best quality education and equal opportunities for all. So why is the glass still at least half empty? Why are we not able to get the access to quality education to every Indian? What role do private players have to play? And of course, what are the issues with regulation that we now need to address on an urgent footing if we are going to change the story finally, as far as higher education in the country is concerned? Well, it's my great honor to introduce Professor C. Rajkumar. He's the founding Vice Chancellor of O.P. Jindal Global University. Thanks so much, Professor Rajkumar, for taking our time to speak to us. You know, I was going through your academic qualifications, and they really are very, very enviable. Did you know right from early on that academia was going to be your scene?
No, I actually did not plan it that way. For like many of us who had the opportunity to study in India and study abroad, till such time I went to Oxford and then to Harvard, I did not seriously look at the opportunity of being an academic. And I think that's the heart of the problem as well, that the best and brightest of India across disciplines in schools and colleges and universities do not aspire today to be an academician. And that's also a challenge that the Indian universities are facing today, because you talk to any vice chancellor, any college principal, any faculty, anybody who's building an institution or is involved in an established institution, they will always lament of the fact that they are struggling to find good faculty as part of their, this problem is faced across institutions, but I would like to believe that colleges and universities tend to face this problem more seriously than, let's say, high schools and secondary education.
So, you know, given that you have your experience at Oxford and Harvard, what do you believe set them apart? Or how do you believe that you got something, what do you believe that you got from your time spent on these top campuses that perhaps students in India are often not exposed to?
So I did go to two good Indian universities, Loyola College Madras and the University of Delhi, and I had very good experiences. But the most important thing that distinguishes some of the universities around the world, particularly in the developed world, is a very strong commitment to research and knowledge creation and the ability of faculty members to advance the research agenda. And in that process, classroom interactions becomes a larger objective for advancing institution building and nation building agenda. They are at the forefront of innovations in almost every area. That part of the imagination of institution involves or requires looking at universities in a completely different manner.
Right.
Unfortunately, we have not, at least the universities have not been looked at in that manner. And there are a number of reasons. If you look at the history and evolution of Indian higher education, in the fields of science and technology, you would find that the great institutional creations were outside the university system. So you look at the Indian Space Research Organization, CSIR, and many other institutions, barring the Indians of Science in Bangalore. Most of these institutions were out of the university setup. And universities and colleges, including in medicine, engineering, and of course liberal arts and humanities, were at best conceived to be teaching institutions and degree awarding institutions, and not the larger objective of research and knowledge creation and publications.
And that's where sort of institutions like yours, are sort of stepping in to say that there's a lot more that we bring to the table, and it's time that students in India are also given the kind of opportunities, that point that you're making, that perhaps others in the developed world do. But if I just pick up on one thing that you've talked about, research, and there's been just so much focus on how we haven't looked at research closely, and our brightest minds have sort of gone abroad because they really wanted to pursue research. We sort of not made it mainstream, as it were. Do you find that there is a bit of a change on that, or do you believe that we still haven't sort of begun talking about it enough?
Well, if I would like to be very candid about it, I think it's one thing to talk about it, and it's a completely different thing to actually do it. First of all, it takes a long time, and it also requires substantial resources. So the investment, the GDP investment in higher education in India is significantly less than what it should be. And secondly, if you start comparing, so in some ways, we should start looking at benchmarking and seeing how other developing countries, let's leave aside the United States and Western Europe and UK and other countries. Let's look at China or say South Korea or Taipei or parts of Asia. These countries in the last 10, 15, 20 years have made substantial investments in higher education, in research, for them to become today, at least some of those institutions there have become world-class institutions. So the first and most important aspect of this is the recognition that we have a long way to go and we need to redesign the institutional imagination that we have. Second, I think research also is possible in an ecosystem in which faculty members have an inspiration from peer group as well.
Right.
You might find in many, even in good Indian institutions, a few people are engaged in research. And I think that is not enough to make a substantial impact in that field or in many fields. So in a way, we need to create an ecosystem. I think if I were to make a policy suggestion, I would say that there is a very serious need for identifying talent across disciplines in India who ultimately can be part of academic institutions. That talent has to emerge out of the Indian schools and colleges. So,
and it's not that there is a dearth of talent.
Oh, not at all. You started off with the fact that there are, 800 million people in India less than 35 years of age. With the demographic dividend that we're going to have, and there are a large number of young, bright people across the country. I don't think they have been sufficiently motivated with a vision to do this. So to put it in very simple terms, we need to develop public policy reforms which can identify the top 20% of every school, every college, every university across all disciplines and somehow nurture their imaginations towards considering academia.
That was actually going to be my point. That do you think that that's happening because we've sort of linked education with employment in this great way that if you do this, a job with a six-figure salary or a seven-figure salary is yours. Every now and then we are told about, dismal stats about employability. When we talk about employability, British Council does a survey and says, there are barely 30% who are coming out from these institutions who are employable. And they're it's the soft skills that now India is lacking. Language skills become a big problem. And in the midst of all this, education has become big business. Everyone wants to get into education, or the big players who made their money somewhere are looking at education as a business of making more money.
Yeah.
In this scenario, how do we get the credible players into the mainstream and put it out there that these are the guys that you perhaps want to align yourselves with, if that is possible, to have the kind of future that you perhaps have in mind? Because the student very often is caught in no man's land.
Right. Well, I think as a starter, we need to look at why quality has become a premium today. It's not just public or private institutions. We have over 800 universities in India, 40,000 plus colleges. The Indian higher education sector is a large one, although the gross enrollment ratio is only 20%.
It's quite poor, right?
So in some ways, a lot of people are aspiring to come into education, but the fact remains that there are not enough good institutions. So while we have...
Why?
Yeah. Well, to begin with, I think we have not been able to create institutions of excellence both in the public and the private sector because we have not been able to envisage them to be quality institutions. And I think it is fair to say that the history and evolution of the early public institutions in the country, over the years, they have deteriorated in academic standards, both in terms of their governance abilities as well as their ability to attract the best people to come into, that's the earlier point. This, interestingly, while the quality of these institutions were coming down, a large number of Indians are aspiring to come into these institutions. So in some ways, we have a very ironical situation in which you have every year when admissions are on, you have these ridiculous cutoffs of colleges in Delhi University and other such institutions where it's 98 and 99, almost 98. That today's 97 and 95 is Esther year 60 or something. So people get embarrassed to be able to get a 95 percentage. So this is a kind of a governance crisis that we are facing. That A, we need to build more institutions, and B, not just more institutions, but institutions that are of having quality and excellence in its pursuit. And the point about employability becomes, in fact, before even employment, if you give good quality education, people are empowered to get jobs. We have a situation in our country where let's say in one of the governments, and it was reported in Times of India a few years ago, a job for peons or office attendants is announced. 20 lakh people apply, and of which some 250 people are PhD graduates, and then several hundreds are masters, MTech and BTech and other such things. And not because these people should not take up positions as an office attendant, but the correlation between the qualifications, the degrees that you obtain and the skills required for a job doesn't match. And the heart of it is quality deficit. So we have to pay a lot more attention to the need for maintaining a minimal standards in all our institutions, regardless of they are small or big, public or private, they are in rural or urban, state or central. There has to be minimal standards, and that's what a focus has.
That's a very important point, that wherever they are, whoever they are catering to, there has to be a minimum quality benchmark that just has to be met. It's not good enough to say because you're urban and sort of the capital, you must be up there, and if you are, say, not in a big center, it's whatever you say is acceptable.
Exactly.
But that's an important point. Another important point that you raised is, and that is something that we get a lot of feedback on, is that admissions season when the class 12th results came out. The point, of course, that you've spoken about is 98, 99. In fact, every year, including this year, in institutions like St. Stephen's, it's 100% for English to get in. What is the system that we are creating? There is so much sort of hand-wringing and chest beating every year when it comes out. What are we doing and what are we creating? But there seems to be no end to it, Professor.
Well, I mean, I wish there is a better and a more nuanced debate surrounding it. Unfortunately, whenever we talk about it, the big problem is the following. I believe that we need more institutions, good institutions. One of the reasons why a large number of people are still, sort of wanting to enter into these few institutions is that they have, there's a very strong feeling that if you don't go into these institutions, the quality deficit even goes so further.
So the perception really, which becomes...
The perception and to large extent reality too. So if you look at an American institution, for example, we all know the Harvards and the Yales and the Stanfords, but if you go even way down to 100, to 150, 200 ranked institutions in the US, they will also maintain a minimal quality. So in some ways, the disparity between the so-called best institution and the not so ranked or good institution is much lesser, and we need to work towards that. Once we start working towards that, we can achieve something. Second, I think we need to also impress upon the young people of our country, including, more importantly, the parents, that this kind of a branding that ends up happening in relation to institutions and the kind of extraordinary pressure that the society and the parents put on the students to aspire to particular colleges and particular degree courses in particular institutions has to change. I think we have a long way to go to make people understand that there are so many, this is almost what has happened is that what used to happen in the 80s and 90s for engineering and medicine, where there was an obsession, I'm happy to share with you that is slowly changing. Parents today are far more sympathetic to, at least endorse and encourage the aspirations of young people. The careers like liberal arts and humanities and social sciences and journalism, which probably would be less accepted a decade or 2 decades ago, is more accepted now. But the next stage of evolution will also have to be this institutional bias and prejudices that is deeply embedded in society. And because of which, I think we also create wrong expectations. There is also a need for diversifying the educational situation. Why everybody need to go to a university or a college for their higher education? Maybe we need to build a whole new area of community colleges and vocational training and education for those who are otherwise bright and brilliant, but would need to be created opportunities for them to pursue areas there. Now, in our country,
to be brilliant in different ways.
Absolutely. In our country, unfortunately, our community colleges, or for that matter, vocational training institutions, are pretty mediocre. And so we've not been able to build that area.
There's also a discomfort, isn't there, about saying I went to a vocational institution. There's a discomfort. It's not mainstream. It's not cool enough.
Exactly. So we need to address these issues, and sooner we address, I think the quality deficit is also challenging us at another level. I think when you went to college and I went to college, most people didn't think about going abroad for their undergrad education. People may go abroad for graduate education, PhD and stuff like that. Today, more than ever, a large number of young Indians who can afford it, of course, middle class and upper middle class, are aspiring and are indeed going overseas for their undergraduate education.
Right. That's coming back to the point, though, that they believe that, in the absence of a 96, 95 or whatever that we are looking at, they're not going to make it. And they're all bright students with 90%, 85%.
Absolutely.
And their parents can afford it.
That's exactly right. And I would go a step further. This comfort level that our premier institutions have today is also not going to last long. I will share with you that we have now enough evidence that there are very bright students who have options to go to some of our leading colleges, are actually going overseas or going to other private institutions, including ours, for example. We've had students who had admission to, LSR and Miranda House and other leading colleges in the country who have chosen to join us. And I'm sure there are other institutions in India and around the world. In some ways, people are making choices not only on the basis of history and pedigree, but are making choices on the basis of current learning outcomes and institutional opportunities that an institution is giving, be it in the public or private sector. So in some ways, as a society and as government, we have not been able to respond more effectively to the aspirations of our young people.
Right. That's quite interesting, and perhaps that's what informed choice is all about, that you sort of don't necessarily go with the flock, that you sort of, you know what you're getting into, and you sort of make an informed, aware choice.